Welcome to a new episode of Turkey Trends, part of Ahwal podcast series. I'm Navana Mahmoud, and my topic today is about Sedat Peker, the notorious mob leader who took Turkey by storm with his series of revelation over YouTube videos, piling accusation against the Turkish government and the Turkish political elite. To discuss that today, it's a pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Ryan Gingeras, professor in the Department of the National Security Affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School in the United States. Ryan, thank you for joining me today.
شكرا جدا على المساعدة.
Oh, thank you, Amaya. Wow, Arabic as well. I have to say to my audience and my viewers that Ryan wrote 5 amazing books, especially about the end of the Ottoman Empire, which I believe it's a must read. So without further ado, Ryan, I want to start with the description. You wrote an article lately about Sedat Peker, which is a very interesting article and very long read. And I was fascinated about the term kabadai, because we had a similar term, which I guess taken from the Ottoman Empire legacy, but we use that term like abadai, we say it in Arabic or Egyptian Arabic, as someone who is manhood, as someone with honor, as someone who defend the land, defend the principles. But that's hardly the description should be used for Sedat, isn't it?
Well, I guess yes and no. I think not to make any moral judgments about Sedat Peker or other kabadai or kabadaya out there. It is in the sense that, the institution of the kabadaya, which, I would liken to, anybody out there who's seen Godfather 2,
yes,
it's somewhat akin to the Don Fanucci character. Now, Don Fanucci, for those of you who are not into Godfather lore, was the guy who wore all white, the one that is set in the, in the past, in the early New York, early 20th century New York, Little Italy.
Right.
In that, this is an individual, in Italian, it would be referred to as a mano nero, like the black hand, a local neighborhood tough guy, but one with a veneer of respectability, or at least a veneer of being, kind of having a certain gravitas within the community.
Right.
And the kabadai comes, its origins are a little, opaque, but, it's widely speculated that it comes out of the remnants of the Janissary Corps, which is, for those who aren't familiar with it, is the old Praetorian Guard of the Ottoman military, so the upper echelon of the military in both in terms of rank, but also in terms of status, that it was historically the Sultan's, imperial guard. And, after its dissolution in the 1820s, what is, believed is that many of those sort of, those who have, were forced out of the Janissary Corps, went underground, and that they reestablished themselves in towns and in major cities as, the term I would use is fixers, a person who would, would be, open to mediating between neighbors or between businesses, families in dispute, and would cut a deal. And the term would be used, which is interesting, is it's a mixture of French and in Turkish is rajon kesmek, the kind of cut a deal on their behalf and would get some sort of monetary compensation in the process. And they were also, extortionists, often running protection rackets, collecting debts, things of that nature. Now, this institution, is a kind of fixture of Ottoman and post-Ottoman urban life in lots of different places, right? And it, becomes to be really celebrated in especially Turkey as a a relic of a much more gentle, in some ways, a gentler, more naive age, right? That this is when, you know, law and order was kept by men of honor and people who had the respect of their community. It was, you know, not, you know, there's, you know, what is kind of the contrast here is that you wouldn't have the corruption of the state coming in and trying to, you know, sort of, you know, settle disputes would oftentimes, you know, be looked at as being less legitimate. So in Sedat Peker's mind, and really sort of more importantly, kind of where he's often situated in the history of organized crime in Turkey, he is an heir to that tradition, right? And arguably he's among the very last of, you know, kind of a rather established line of people who fancy themselves in this way and who have attained a great deal of attention as a result of it.
Right. I want next to question his motive from all these videos. His motive, is it why he described himself as a nationalist, as always defend the Turkish state against, he's standing against the Kurds, against anybody he sees as the enemy of the state. Why he is throwing all this accusation at the people who supposedly sharing his goals of defending the state?
I mean, the very short answer to this is I don't really understand it myself.
Right.
I think
I thought you will have a guess, or maybe
I don't. I mean, I could speculate, but I frankly, I mean, I think it's opaque, and I think the one thing that we should draw from it,
yes,
is that this is the nature of a lot of relationships, I think generally within Turkey's political establishment, right? That sure, there are ideological factions,
right,
and I think those ideological factions are real, but there is a great deal, there is more overlap than perhaps many people assume, and there are greater fissures within these camps that are often than they often appear, right?
Yeah.
And you know, the truth is, you know, I don't know why he's spinning this kind of narrative, and how he is sort of situating himself in this, because in some ways the way he talks is kind of in the third, you know, kind of sort of in an omniscient present. Like he's not necessarily putting himself always in this sort of as a person who witnessed something,
right,
but rather as somebody who has knowledge of these things. And so we're kind of left to guess A, how he knows these things,
right,
and B, where he fits in to this sort of broader story and what motivates him.
right.
And so I really don't know. And I
guess
think
it's very hard for everybody to know for sure, because it's a dark, murky world. Which bring me, I noticed that you wrote in your article that he is located in Dubai. Is that for sure, or is just what people say? Because
well, I mean, he told us he was there and he's leaving now.
Yeah,
that was
that's what I am trying to get into it. Does the location matter? Does it matter where he is broadcasting those places, this allegation from? He left to the Balkan initially, and then people say he is in Dubai, and now he tweeted that his hotel place, today he tweeted that his hotel place is being leaked. So he is now heading into a long trip, whatever that means. Does his location matter? Does it make his allegation more dodgy? Because obviously the United Arab Emirates and Turkey are obviously not in a good term. So I guess the reason I'm asking that, because the interior minister, who Pekers have piled a lot of accusation against his son, have labeled the United Arab Emirates as one of those countries behind the coup. And the second country is the United States. And there is a long trip is what he claimed on his tweet, that he's taking a long trip. Some people interpret it as heading to the United States. So because now he left the United Arab Emirates, the nefarious for the Turkish government, so it must be he's heading to the second one. Obviously, I'm not asking you to expect anything, but does his location have any significance to discredit his allegation or credit it?
Again, I don't know. I mean, I think, that, since the winter, when he sort of made it known that he had left.
Yes.
And went to, initially saying the Balkans, and then there was reporting that he was in Macedonia, and there was reporting that in Montenegro, and then going, and then initially where he was located was somewhat of a mystery, and then there was sort of kind of social media postings that the background of these early videos were identified as being at a resort in Dubai.
Yes.
I mean, well, first of all, I mean, Sedat Peker, this is not the first time Sedat Peker has been kind of, I don't know if necessarily want to say on the run, but he has been, he's taken flight from Turkey. And the first time he went to Romania in the late 1990s.
Right.
And I mean, the one thing I would have assumed is that it had something to do with his business connections.
Correct.
Whatever those connections are, which are also really opaque.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think, trying to deduce his motivation by virtue of his location, I think, you're kind of treading in really deep water. I mean, I think it's really hard to say. And in terms of where he goes, I don't know. I mean, the thing is, if he was to go, many places, I'm sure there has to be issues pertaining to extradition that he cares about. There has to be issues regarding business relationships he has. He has to, I mean, but then again, it is totally unclear.
Right, which bring me, I'm glad you mentioned the word extradition, because another news a lot of people didn't follow today is that Turkey have issued a formal extradition request against Ken Donda, who is a journalist from Germany. And they accused him of leaking government secrets as this accusation, and they made a formal extradition request. But interestingly, Turkey had not or did not make any formal extradition request against Peker, despite that if we look at from neutrality against the accusation, Peker have made far more dangerous accusation, far more outrageous accusation, and the leakage he made have made him have 1 million followers. But Turkey have response to his formal response to his allegation is actually quite soft. Do you agree with that reading?
I mean, there's a couple things there. I mean, I think that the case against Can Dündar, came at a time in which I think the position of the Turkish government vis-a-vis Europe, vis-a-vis the opposition, was stronger.
Right.
And now Turkey is a country that is much more, is really quite isolated internationally, in which I think there is far less hope of, coercing states of trying to arrest and then render somebody like, Can Dündar or even Sedat Peker. I mean, I think it's, I think I think that perception and sort of the weakening of Turkey's relationships with the world matters perhaps in this regard. I say perhaps, but I don't really know.
Sure.
And then I think the other component of it too is that this, the nature of this scandal is so outrageous
Yes.
And sort of defies an easy narrative for the government or government officials to frame any kind of case or argument in the way that they did against somebody like Can Dündar. Can Dündar was portrayed as a kind of fellow traveler, agent of this broader, FETÖ conspiracy. Putting Sedat Peker in that conspiracy is a little tougher. I mean, certainly there are those, there are allies in the media in Turkey today who are working very hard to sort of frame Sedat Peker as this, stooge for Fethullah Gulen in the United States. It comes across kind of strange, given the fact that, his reputation, his track record, as well as, frankly, his historic proximity to the government. So that may be weighing on their minds. But again, I mean, this is all just speculation.
Sure. And I am glad that you mentioned that the allegation that he is linked to the gulenists, which a lot of the Turkish media is trying to frame him that way, because you mentioned in your article that he was imprisoned in the 2008 Erdogans trial, which was later revealed that it was the gulenists were behind it, and he was released in 2014. So if the gulenists was against him in the past, surely now it doesn't make sense that he is allegation that he is linked to the gulenists. And a lot of the Turkish media is blaming the Gulf states of hosting gulenists, but he clearly is not, isn't it?
Oh, it's strange. It's super weird, needless to say. I mean, I can't, really add much beyond that. It's a weird, but I think, in all seriousness, this is the kind of, rhetorical cul-de-sac that Turkish authorities find themselves in, is that they've spun up this entire narrative of, that's based in a conspiracy around a group that now has been pretty,
blamed for everything,
pretty much nebulized in the case of Turkey, and yet somehow this individual, somehow is fit within it, and is, even though he had been on the wrong side of them at one point, and then embraced by the government, now he's back. It just, I mean, it defies logic, but I think that's one of the things that makes perhaps this case a little bit different than past scandals. I mean, I think that, we've had other corruption scandals in Turkey's past, or sort of scandals akin to this, that Erdogan has been able to walk away from, and he may be able to sort of dodge this bullet too. But I think the difference between, say, this and, let's say, the the revealing of tapes, audio recordings of Erdogan and his sons in 2014 trying to hide money, right? I mean, that can be, much more coherently associated with a Gulenist conspiracy. This one's a little bit tougher.
Right. Which bring me, again, you mentioned in your article, I remember in the 90s when I first started, in my little way, following Turkish politics, the gangster was part of the scene. But Erdogan, once he appeared in power in 2002, he promised transparency, he promised clean politics. And now the mafia and the mercury and the lack of transparency is creeping back to Turkey. So now Turkey is encountering or reliving the 90s era, but with an Islamist government as well. So at least it was secular before, so there was something positive, but now they are the Islamist thing. How that will affect the Turkish voter? Because I noticed again in your article that Paul suggested that the voters are not particularly buzzed about Turkey, but he's gaining a lot of followers and a lot of reports is about him. How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I do, in the article I wrote for War on the Rocks, I do cite, one recent poll that more than anything AKP voters are not necessarily tuning into these things and are not necessarily do not necessarily appear too interested in what he has to say. Now, I don't know how people at large in Turkey are necessarily viewing this. My general sense is that Erdogan is broadly unpopular for various reasons.
Right.
And that these reasons don't necessarily align all of the different, kind of oppositional factions. I think that his, what Sedat Peker represents for the opposition actually varies, quite a bit. So I'm not sure if this is necessarily going to equal some sort of kind of a moment in which the opposition becomes more galvanized. More importantly, I think, when it comes to actual voting, people actually have to vote for someone.
Yes.
And I think, one thing that Erdogan has been able to leverage quite well is the fact that there really isn't, there aren't many individuals that are able to gather enough support to able to beat him on a one-to-one basis. People may not like him, they may not like the alternatives as much.
Sure.
So I don't know if necessarily this is something that's going to, kind of affect the outcome. If anything, I think it affirms the suspicions and the prejudices of, lots of people who are already, had rather negative views of the government.
Okay, now the last thing is about the United States. The United States is strongly, the Biden administration is against corruption and mafia, and they sanction, I believe, in Bulgaria, some people or politicians linked to corruption. Do you think those allegations by Sedat Peker will be raised in the next NATO meeting, or will, even without the NATO meeting, do you think the United States will pay attention more or try to, cut the links on the dark mafia in Europe, especially in NATO members? The reason I mentioned that I heard other commentators from non-Turkish, from the other NATO members, who are saying they are concerned that all these dubious links, all these links of cocaine trading, links to Venezuela, etc., might not just remain in Turkey, it might have links to other countries in Eastern Europe. And they don't want this to be, left as if, into the mercury board. They want it to be investigated. Do you see that will go further, or do you see Peker to be a vanished figures, a phenomena which raise attention, but then slowly dying down?
I mean, I think to answer your first question, I think there is enough on the agenda for a very brief meeting, that's going to be coming up between Biden and Erdogan, that no Sedat Peker is necessarily going to rise that high to the top. So I'm doubtful, but I don't know. Would the U.S. get involved in anything beyond that? I think, my only guess would be, and this is just a guess, is that it depends if there are any allegations, that prove to be true that actually feature the transfer of money through the U.S. financial system.
Right.
That's sort of like, I think, that's the kind of the entree usually for federal investigators in the United States to take on cases that are ostensibly have nothing to do with the U.S.
Right.
So if the accusation, for example, of drug trafficking is based on something like fact, if there is evidence that money related to those transactions actually pass through the U.S. system, that may be the basis for greater U.S. involvement. But that's the only thing that would ever come to my mind that would lead to it. Otherwise, I mean, I think the United States has historically been rather aloof of, kind of these sort of internal politics regarding the mafia in Turkey. I don't, because frankly, there's not much the U.S. can do about it.
Yes.
And it, again, the only predicate that would serve U.S. interests if there was some sort of financial stake or any kind of commercial stake related to individuals involved in organized crime in Turkey, and I've never seen evidence of that, at least in terms of the way it's reported.
Well, he promised that he will keep tweeting, even if he couldn't post any videos. So we shall see how the Netflix series Sedat Peker will end. But for the time being, thank you very much, Ryan, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.